So if I just went to 10 random people in the street and I said, you're an emotional decision maker, how many of those people would have reacted that positively? Zero. Because the psychologists over the decades have said, well, you can't be, there's emotional people and then there's rational people, right? No, we're all emotional decision makers who look to justify and validate with information.
Now you're in neuroscience and you're getting access to these kind of technology, MRIs, etc., that can show what the brain is doing. And what I'm hearing from you is that we're seeing biological changes in the brain based on the way that we communicate, based on the way that we receive and communicate information. And you spoke about it changing with specific sequences. Can you tell us more about that sequence?
Yeah, and I think there's, you don't know what you don't know, right? And as humans, we evolve through the acquisition of information, and we try to do research, and we're in a constant pursuit of new and learning and understanding as human beings. That's why, as a species, we're continuing to evolve and come up with better and better technologies and great ideas. And it's a wonderful thing that's kind of built into us. When it comes to communication, though, this is what I find somewhat ironic. So Elon Musk has been in the news lately because he just bought a chunk of Twitter, and he's arguably one of the most, I would say, innovative thinkers of our generation. And if you listen to him talk, he actually credits first principles reasoning as a way to build every company he's ever built, which dates all the way back to Aristotle. Well, first principles reasoning says that when you're approaching something, you have two ways of innovating. You can either take a box that somebody else has built and try to make the box iteratively better, or you can break the walls of the box down and not even use a box and start with the fundamental truths of what you're trying to solve for, and then build up without any preconceived idea of what's possible. And that's first principles reasoning. And that's how he's built SpaceX and Tesla and all of his companies. And I think about that from the standpoint of communication. This brings us back to the science. So 11 years ago when I started Braintrust, and I didn't know this was first principles reasoning at the time, by the way, so I don't want to sound like I was a complete Aristotle nut back 11 years ago. What I did do though, I thought, okay, I've been through, countless training programs over the course of my career, whether it was in sales, whether it was marketing frameworks, whether it was leadership coaching platforms. I've been through all of them. I worked for the world's leading biotech company. I had unlimited resources for development, basically. And what I recognized is that none of them, not a single one of them, had any scientific undergirding, any scientific foundation. At best, they had some psychology. And then when I got to looking into the psychology, it really wasn't validated psychology. It was stuff that someone had created 30, 40 years ago, and they thought it was the way to do things. So I started with this idea, the premise that let's break down the box. I don't want to iteratively make a different sales program or a different coaching program or leadership, blah, blah, blah. I want to start with no walls in the box, just looking at the science. What do we know about the brain today that we didn't know 30 years ago? And how does that impact how people communicate? And so let's break it down. Back in the late 1960s, the triune brain theory became in vogue. And that was the idea that the brain has three layers, right? It has the neocortex, and then the limbic system, and then the reptilian brain, or the root brain, we call it. And I looked at that first, and I thought, okay, well, that's really interesting. And I like that. And at the time, they didn't think it was necessarily built and rooted in too much neuroscience, but now as we've advanced with technology, we're able to start to map it. So I was comparing this to what was out there with left brain thinking, right brain, all that kind of stuff, which was really more psychological than it was biological. And as we started to look at the sequence of communication and using functional MRI and EEG, Dr. Tony Jack, who's Dr. Dan on my team's kind of research partner for his dissertation, he decided to see if he could actually validate this. And he broke the brain, instead of 3 networks, into 2, the analytical network, the neocortex, and then the emotional empathic network, the limbic and the reptilian, the limbic and the root. And he found out that every single human being in his test, which is thousands, all processed information the exact same way, regardless of where they were from in the world, regardless of their gender, regardless of their socioeconomic background. And what he started to see was these two networks activated based on what was communicated. And the interesting thing was the analytical network did not have the capacity for change or innovation. It was biologically designed for evaluation, analysis, comparison, judgment. It was the emotional empathic network where you contain your internal visualization and all things like emotions and trusts and feelings. And it's the area of our brains, regardless again of socioeconomic, gender, backgrounds, culture. That's where we actually initiate all decision-making. And then we look to recruit information to validate and justify that emotional decision. And so I started thinking about this, Mick, and I thought, wow, so if I just went to 10 random people in the street and I said, you're an emotional decision maker, how many of those people would react to that positively? Zero.
Most.
Because the psychologists over the decades have said, well, you can't be, there's emotional people and then there's rational people, right? No, we're all emotional decision makers who look to justify and validate with information, every single one of us. And so when we are able to validate this, and with Dr. Jack's work, we found that you actually can't activate both networks at the same time. You have to vacillate between them. You can do it very quickly, mind you, but you have to vacillate between them. And so I started to look at this data and research and said, okay, well, let's test it. Let's start looking at, if I just communicate facts to people, what happens? It activates their analytical network, puts them into defense mode, puts them into evaluation, comparison, compared to status quo mode. It puts them in a position to start to feel like they have to justify their current way of thinking and doing versus being open to new ideas. And the more information I give them, the deeper they dig in their heels to not change. Interesting. Does that ever change? No, it doesn't. So when you think about it as a leader, think about it as a salesperson, think about it as a parent. If I activate your analytical network with data, facts, information, you are automatically going to be evaluating and comparing that to what you believe, what you're currently doing, and how do you need to defend yourself against what you're currently doing compared to what this person's telling you should do. Now think about that and the implications that has on change. How many leaders listening today go in and tell somebody what they need to do different, or manage people? You can't manage people. You have to lead people. You can only manage process. So to the extent that we communicate in a way that activates the analytical network, we're processing lots of information. The receivers can process almost unlimited amounts of data, but it doesn't drive change. It actually tends toward driving the unwillingness to change. So the idea that you can activate the emotional empathic network first, and then do what we call the emotion coaster, where you know the right information to communicate based on the situation, to activate the right part of the brain that puts the person in a better state biologically to be willing to change. That was game changing. And when those light bulbs went off for us, and for me specifically, I said, there's nothing out there like this. No one's talking about this, and then giving people a model and a framework and some coaching around how to do that as a professional communicator.
But Simon Sinek has stumbled across the same thing you are, but he came across it a different way. What he did was just codify what he saw was working. So he saw people out there that were speaking in a certain sequence and go, oh, okay, that's different and it's working, right? Whereas what you've done is proven that in science through watching MRIs and seeing which parts of the brain activate through different types of information to prove scientifically what we've been thinking here, that people make decisions emotionally and they justify them rationally. And I've got a dear friend that will be listening to this show, Jeff, that will swear black and blue that he's analytical and he uses spreadsheets for everything. He's going to buy a new car, spreadsheet. He's going to make an investment decision, spreadsheet. But I guarantee you, because I watch him from the side, I guarantee you he makes an emotional decision about that car and then he uses his spreadsheet to make him feel good about the decision and go, oh, yeah,
right.
It's got ABS braking, it's got this, et cetera, et cetera. But he's 100% making that emotional decision. The other bit that I want to also go into is what you said about change. So the neocortex and the analytical part of the brain is resistant to change. It doesn't want to unlearn what it already thinks is true, and makes it difficult for you to discover anything new. And you need to unlearn what you think you already know before you can learn anything new. So now what I'm hearing from you, Jeff, to summarize all that, to always remember that people make decisions emotionally and justify it rationally. That if you want to convince someone of a new way of seeing the world, you need to use the roller coaster ride that Jeff is talking about. Start with emotion. You need to put in some of that rationality, because that's going to help them defend their decision that they make, but it's not going to help them make the decision. And I'm sure everyone in the audience has heard the term analysis paralysis. If you just give someone 16 facts as to why your way is the best way, forget it. But if you can go emotion, fact, emotion, fact, emotion, and finished on emotion, so they're still in a decision-making process, then you're on your way to convincing them of a new way of thinking.